Hacking is a bit like an onion. It has layers. If you pick it up, you'd be forgiven for thinking the outer skin is all there is. But you peel it away, and there's more on the inside. Layers, all the way down. And at the core of this onion are APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats, the most sophisticated and insidious hacker groups out there. Like it or not, most APTs are just government-linked organizations. Think intelligence agencies, military units, and companies in their direct or indirect control. They get billions of dollars in funding and use them to fight shadow wars all over the place. Regular criminals and hacktivists can't hold a candle to that. Except for all the cases where they can, though, because hacktivists and cybercriminals are a very, very important source of manpower for the APTs. Of course, we don't know that much about how these three-letter agencies hire their personnel, but we do know that in the US, it's a job that a cybersecurity professional can apply for. Pass a very tough exam, and you're in. In China, the government tends to headhunt gifted people from IT companies and sometimes form entire hacker brigades within those companies. APTs from Iran, North Korea, Israel, and many other countries are tied to their militaries, and people get hired when they join the army. But there is one country that does things differently: Russia. The only country that has an entire industry dedicated to creating a full-fledged hacker army out of its criminals. The whole system isn't exactly a secret. The Russian government itself boasted about this countless times. The people who worked for it aren't shy of talking about it as well. There are entire books written about this phenomenon, and we managed to track down people who immerse themselves in this world and live to tell the tale. So here's the story of how Russia recruits its hackers. The word hacktivism was invented in the 90s. It's a pretty straightforward mix of hackers and activists, people who hack and people who seek some sort of political and social change. When you think of the stereotypical hacktivist, you probably think of someone who's very anti-establishment, somebody who attacks governments or large corporations. That's where it all started. But a lot of hacktivists are interested in helping governments rather than attacking them, and that's exactly where our story starts. By the late 90s, Russia had a vibrant hacker scene. For the most part, it was an extension of one that existed in the rest of the world. Ambitious punks with their heads full of ideas about free movement of information and such. Many Russian hackers from this period were quite politically active and rather anti-establishment. But then, the Second Chechen War started. No, we are not going to try explaining it. It was a mess. A Russian region of Chechnya tried to break off, Russia tried taking it back, and everyone involved had a pretty bad time. In late 90s Russia, this war was a very big deal. The first proper, well-organized Russian hacktivist group we know of was formed as a result of this. This group called itself the Siberian Network Brigade, and its goal was to support the war effort online. The brigade began hacking government and media sites of the self-declared Chechnya in 1999. The Chechen side, hit with an onslaught of cyber attacks, claimed that what stands behind this hacker group is the FSB, Russia's main intelligence service. However, for at least a few years, this was most likely not true. The core of the brigade was formed out of several patriotically inclined students at Tomsk Polytechnic University. They were not professionals, and they exclusively used the cheapest and most basic tricks in the book. Their bread and butter was DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service. You take a bunch of computers and direct them to send requests to a particular website. The website gets jammed, stops working, and voila, you took down the website. Usually, it returns to operation as soon as you stop jamming it, but that's none of your concern. Another technique, defacement, was a bit trickier to implement. To deface a website or change its contents to something else, you have to find a way to get admin access to it, which is usually done by breaking the username and password, or more often, just guessing it. After the start of the Second Chechen War, the websites of the self-declared state got DDoSed and defaced all the time. In this work, the Siberian Network Brigade was joined by a few other groups and lone wolves. And to make their jobs easier, in 2002, these hackers released a virus called Mesenya. It was as primitive as one can get. They just took a few years old Melissa virus and repackaged it. The payload spread as an email attachment pretending to be a satirical cartoon about Vladimir Putin. It would proliferate by infecting computers and then sending a copy of itself to all contacts. Every Monday, the hijacked machine would act as a network of bots, a botnet, and execute a DDoS attack on a particular Chechen website. Mažeika was most likely not created by the Siberian Network Brigade, but by the early 2000s, there were a lot of other Russian hacktivist groups working side by side. Some of them did not have proper tools to conduct cyber attacks, and so had to come up with ways to improvise. Others had their own botnets, and amongst those, nobody could compete with civil anti-terror. The group headed by the spam king of the internet, Petr Levashov, a man better known as Severa. Oh, by the way, this picture of Severa, as well as other graphics for this video, were done by our brilliant artists, without a smudge of AI involved. The animations, the script, and the voiceover are fully human-generated too. Yes, even the voiceover. My name is Ben Mitchell. Look me up. There is some chance that reluctance to embrace our robot overlords will come back to bite us below the waistline. But in the meantime, we believe that going fully human is the only way to preserve the quality of our videos. If you think the same and would like to support human-made content, please like and subscribe. Now, calling Severa the spam king of the internet is not editorializing. That's how this guy really called himself, and has been one of the major figures in the Russian cybercriminal scene since the late 90s. He was mostly involved with carding, as well as running one of the most successful spamming services in the world. If you lived in the 2000s and had an email address, you probably got at least several emails sent through Severa services, or more likely, several thousand of them. There was a wealth of similar shady groups in Russia at the time. They operated in a gray area by creating an outward image of a legitimate business, but not even bothering to uphold it when it came to online presence. Severa's price lists were public, and ads for his services were all over the internet. And most importantly, the Russian law enforcement remained unbothered. How could that be? Why wasn't he caught? Pretty much everybody who knew Severa at the time knew the answer. Severa freelanced for the government. And he was able to do that thanks to the success of his very own anti-Chechen hacktivist group, the Civil Anti-Terror. Its core idea was to unite all the disparate groups behind one banner and coordinate attacks on Chechnya. Sporadic DDoSing and repackaged viruses no longer worked, and there was a need for an all-out offensive. Severa began personally messaging his peers and inviting them to join his push. Civil anti-terror grew. And then it began shifting focus. Chechnya stopped being their main target. Other perceived enemies of the Russian state became much more important, primarily the Russian opposition, media sites, NGOs, and parties opposed to the ruling government, even foreign countries. Severa did not really differentiate these attacks from his primary job, cybercrime. He owned some of the most powerful botnets in the world, networks of infected machines, puppeteered with malware similar to Mažeika, and used in his spam business to send billions of emails promoting everything from counterfeit drugs to get-rich-quick schemes. But then sometimes he would use these slave networks to further the interests of the Russian state, such as in 2007, when his botnets were used in an all-out cyber war on Estonia. The war began with just several thousand volunteers lending their internet traffic to the attackers. But as the offensive grew, Severa joined and brought his armies of bots on board. This war was organized and led by Nashi, an ultra-nationalist young organization tied to United Russia, the country's main political party. Several years later, politicians from Nashi and United Russia admitted organizing this attack. Several more years later, Severa announced that he had worked for United Russia since 2007. But at the time, United Russia wasn't yet synonymous with the Russian government. It was the country's most powerful political party, but not the most powerful organization there. And through his work for United Russia, Severa attracted the attention of somebody even more important. In 2006, Anton Moskal, a programmer from Moscow, decided to clone Severa's civil anti-terror website, to study it and preserve it for future generations. His copy of the site remained online even when the original website got deleted later that year. Then, on May 28, 2007, Anton received a phone call. A polite man asked him if he is the guy behind the civil anti-terror, and if he's not, maybe he has Severa's contacts? The polite man said he was from the National Anti-Terrorist Committee, an offshoot of the FSB, and that his employers were very excited by Severa's initiatives and would like to collaborate with him. Anton was not a fan of Severa's work, or the intelligence agencies in general, and so he got in touch with independent journalists and provided receipts for the call. Thanks to him, we now know that at least in May 2007, Severa was not yet an employee of the FSB. But that was about to change. Severa was not the only prominent Russian cybercriminal recruited by the FSB in those early days. We know at least several others. One of them was named Dmitry Dukachev, better known as Forb. Just like Severa, Forb was a bit of a character. He lived in a small town of Kamensk-Uralsky. His favorite video games were Worms Armageddon, Need for Speed, and Quake 3. His first major cyber attack was the hacking of a local ISP to give himself free internet access. We know about that because Forb lived a very active online life. His entire career can easily be tracked through blog posts, articles, and interviews. In 2002, he began writing for a prominent Russian hacking magazine. Around the same time, he began a carding business. He also boasted of hacking websites on request. Of course, Russian hacker forums, magazines, and Forbes' own website were full of vivid descriptions of his exploits. At some point, his small hometown became too small, and Forb moved to Moscow. There, he got himself a girlfriend, became a full-time employee of the hacking magazine, and began living the high life of a small-town cybercriminal. After one especially fiery party, Forb and a few friends found themselves trying to destroy some surveillance cameras on a random Moscow street and got into a scuffle with the police. One of the policemen turned out to be an officer of the FSB. According to Forbes' own words, the officer decked him in the jaw before arresting him. This smack became the beginning of a long and mutually beneficial relationship. At first, Forb just collaborated with the FSB. Then he became a fully fledged employee of the 2nd Department of the Operational Directorate of the FSB Center for Informational Security. Now, we could assume that the blog posts of a criminal are not a reliable source of information, and that the story of how the FSB hired a hacker after arresting him on the street is not what really happened. But the problem is that we can corroborate a lot of Forbes' words through other means, because one of the roles he fulfilled in the FSB was hiring and monitoring other cyber criminals in the employ of the agency. No less than 2 other hackers, carders and scammers by day, hacktivists by night, said that they were recruited to the FSB by Forb. This usually happened on hacker forums, where Forb would spend most of his days. There, he would look for people who shared his views, a patriotic inclination, and an idea that to help Russia, one has to attack the United States and Europe. Some people saw this as a righteous transfer of wealth and conducted cybercrime, imagining themselves as Robin Hoods. Forb did this kind of work for over a decade, recruiting who knows how many hacktivists and cybercriminals to the FSB's cause. To the best of our knowledge, he never really graduated to becoming a proper state-sponsored threat actor. If he did, he probably would have boasted about that all over the internet. Forbes' FSB career ended quite abruptly in 2016. He got arrested again. This time, not for cybercrime and not for smashing security cameras. He, along with 3 other hackers, was accused of treason and transferring classified information to the intelligence services of the United States. From court documents, we know by that point Forb was a major at the FSB. In court, the accused said they did nothing wrong and that their arrest was just Russia's attempt to dispose of the evidence of the 2016 attack on the Democratic National Convention. The trial shook the Russian hacking scene to its core, but that's a tale for another day. However, it's clear that it definitely did not stop countless other cybercriminals from following the same pipeline: hacktivism, then cybercrime, then FSB. In fact, by the time Forb was sentenced, this pipeline was just a part of a much larger and more robust system of relationships some researchers called the Dark Covenant, an unspoken set of agreements between cybercriminals and the government, and the rules by which criminals can operate in Russia without being punished. The essence of the rules is simple. Under no circumstances should you go against the Russian government and its interests. Time and time again, these rules were repeated by countless hackers interviewed by a journalist named Daniil Turovsky. Most of the stories in his videos are based on a book, A Short Story of Russian Hackers. We didn't trust it blindly, of course, so wherever possible, we cross-referenced it with other reports. Turovsky's book was published in 2019, and his research into the Russian hacktivist culture and its ties to the government cuts off at that point. What happened next? Well, to understand that, we have to find somebody who did some more recent research. Meet Leah. She's an analyst at Graphica, a social media analysis company. She spent the last several years keeping track of hundreds of Telegram channels where hackers continue boasting of their exploits, just like they did back in the days of Severa and Forb.
So you're going to have groups that are directly piloted by people in the Russian services. So for instance, your Russian angry hackers did it, which is, according to the US, both associated with the Russian state media outlet RT, but also led by a Russian Federal Security Service officer. You will have groups that also have been identified as fronts for the GRU. So this is the case, for instance, for Solsepyok, which the Ukrainian SSSCIP attributed again, to the GRU. And you also have, groups like Cyber Army of Russia Reborn, which was, again, according to the US, founded and directed by the GRU. At the same time, you're going to have projects like No Names, which is considered by the US as a covert project that is linked to the Center for the Study of Network Monitoring of the Youth Environment, among others, and that was something that was established by Vladimir Putin in October 2018 to safeguard the youth on the internet. And so those groups have direct links to the Russian security services.
Of course, in all of these cases, we don't really know how exactly the groups were formed. Gone are the days of leaders writing in their blogs about how they were approached by the FSB because of their bustling hacktivism business. But there are still rumors, the talk of the town. And just like back in the day, it often involves people in the scene being convinced that the only reason a particular cyber criminal enjoys impunity within Russia is because of their connections to the security services. Case in point, Killnet, the most famous modern Russian hacktivist collective and a true inheritor of the values of civil anti-terror pioneered back in the day. The values of combining business and pleasure, a cybercriminal venture, and hacktivism. Here's how Killnet works. They have a large collection of Telegram channels with tons of followers, because who doesn't like following some cybercriminals? On those channels, they regularly claim to attack massive and important targets, militaries, megacorporations, entire states, taking them down, destroying them, complete with graphics full of explosions and bold claims. The end goal is to attract attention. That's how they get the donors, the people who would like to donate some crypto to the cause. But that's not the only way to earn money. Killnet also sells ads on its Telegram channels, advertising anything from rival hacker groups and channels to the weirdest products you can imagine. At one point, these guys even released their own brand of jewelry. And this business was paying off. In 2023, Killmilk, the leader of Killnet, was doxxed. His identity, along with a bunch of juicy personal life details, was revealed. As it turned out, the Killnet brand allowed its leader, a 30-year-old man named Nikolaj Serafimov, to live a life full of luxury cars and drugs. Alongside personal photos and details, a curious rumor circulated. A rumor that Killmilk followed the precedent set by his forebears, that he was affiliated with the FSB.
Killnet is an interesting one in terms of links to the Russian government, because some companies think they're linked to the FSB because their leader, Killmilk, was doxxed, and there were rumors that he was part of FSB. But at the same time, in 2023, when Killnet tried to rebrand as a private military hacker company, they really tried to appeal to the Russian government by making special contracts or, special tasks that they could provide Russian government bodies and things like this. And they tried twice, actually, first with their Black Skill PMC, and then when Killnet itself rebranded as a PNC. And it didn't seem to work because I remember them posting rants about the fact that people in administrations didn't care about them.
So maybe the rumors were just rumors after all. But in some other cases, it's not just rumors. The connection between the hacktivist groups and the government is laid bare.
At the same time, you also have the US that attributed Russian angry hackers did it to the FSB, in the sense that it is linked to it's directed and led by one FSB officer.
The officer in question is a man named Alexei Gerashenko, and according to available information, he headed to the hacktivist group right from its inception, meaning that the group was set up by the agency right from the start. In that sense, it was very different from the ones that were brought into the fold by recruiting their leaders. And its mode of operation was also very different.
So for context, they are a group that they were, because they are inactive right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if they come back at some point. They were a group that was mainly doing doxing of Ukrainian soldiers that are fighting in the Ukrainian army. And so what we've seen with them is that they used to announce those massive hacks of personal information of Ukrainian soldiers on their Telegram channel. And literally minutes, and when I say minutes, it was between 1 minute and 4 minutes, after they promoted their new docs and their new leak, we would see RIA Novosti, which is the state agency, starting to give a lot of details about what they did and what they claimed they got, and so on and so forth. And then from here, gain another layer of amplification in the rest of the Russian state media and the Kremlin-aligned media in Russia. Yeah, as I said, it was always a matter of minutes. And first time we were like, oh, that's interesting. But then it happened over and over and over again, and it was always the same timing.
But going back to regular hacktivist groups, the ones that weren't set up by the Russian government as a front for state-sponsored hacking activity, but rather that turned cybercrime into a business and enjoyed the protection of the Russian state. To understand them better, and to give you a better chance of joining them, we've asked Leah about the end goal, the main reason why they still exist.
It allows the state media and the Russian ecosystem to feed their audience this type of, cyber superiority on the West. And that's also very important because it's just part of the whole hybrid picture here. They're going to promote, obviously, like terrestrial attacks, terrestrial victories, and so on. But at the same time, cyberspace is playing a very big role here. And you also keep an engagement here as well. If you're able to say, oh my God, this group is doing this group is doing that, it serves the broader narrative that Russia is doing good and that Russia is winning and that Russia is having superiority on Ukraine, of course, but also on the West. And this is not like a specifically Russian thing, I would say. If you look on the Iran side of things, for instance, you also have those state-backed or state-sponsored activist groups that are consistently being amplified by the IRGC media. Because, again, it gives this superiority picture that most of the time is not real because the attacks themselves are not particularly skilled or not particularly true or real. But since cybersecurity in general is a topic that is not widely known, it's very easy to portray a DDoS attack or a SCADA intrusion that was based on a simple Shodan scan as a very highly technical cyber threat or cyber intrusion.
But there is one catch. Going back to some of the characters we met in this story, how did this role in the fight for the greatness of their motherland end? Severa, Petr Levashov, the forerunner of the Russian hacktivist scene and one of the first members of that scene to be recruited by the FSB. He went on holiday in Spain and was arrested there. He was accused of numerous cybercriminal activities, many of which he actively boasted about in his blog. After his arrest, he promptly spilled out the fact that he worked for the Russian government. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, but he got released in 2021 to begin a career in cybersecurity. But then in 2025, he was doxxed again. The Russian state media accused him of being an informant to the FBI and of running Bratva, a popular Telegram channel that offered a surprisingly revealing insider view to the Russian criminal underworld. Since that doxing, Severa went off radar and will probably think very hard before having a cybercrime-related online presence again. Forb, Dmitry Dugushev, was a part of the scandalous trial of 2016. He and 3 other hackers, 2 of them FSB officers, and 1 employee of Kaspersky, were accused of leaking information about Russian hackers to the American intelligence agencies. Dugushev and the others pleaded guilty. They did not deny collaborating with the Americans. but claimed doing that for one reason and one reason only. Because the Russian state, the state they fought for, threw them under the bus. Supposedly, it was to get rid of them after using up their talents and putting them in prison so they'd have no way to talk about the things they were forced to do. In the end, Forb was sentenced to 6 years, and his fate after his release from prison remains unknown. Killmilk, Nikolaj Serafimov, didn't end up in prison, at least to the best of our knowledge. He was doxxed though, and not by Western intelligence agencies or hackers. In 2023, his personal information was revealed by one of the Russian state-sponsored news websites, which referred to numerous hackers who snitched on their former comrade. The reason for that, according to those fellow hackers, was that Killnet stopped being useful. He began breaking the rules and annoying the very people he worked with. So he had to be stripped of his wealth, status, and publicly humiliated. Whether that's better than going to prison or worse, we're not the ones to decide. We hope you enjoyed this brief look into how Russia recruits its hackers. We're extremely thankful to all the people who made this video happen, not least of them being our subscribers. If you're not already one of them, you know what to do. Thanks, and see you in the next video.